Hey everybody, Jake here from Bearded Gear. I wanted to give you my first impressions on the Finch Runtly. This knife is really cool. Frankly, I was super excited to get this knife. I've seen a few people post reviews of it, and I've watched those like a hawk. And I started following Finch on Instagram recently, and I've just been really intrigued by this knife. Now that I have the knife in hand, I am super glad that I went with the yellow scales. This is totally atypical for me. I'm usually either black or gray or OD green, flat dark earth, like kind of earth tones, or monochromatic knife kind of guy. Sometimes I like blues, but I have never, at least that I can remember, owned a yellow knife. So this is the first for me. It's my little baby banana knife, but I think it looks really cool. That was totally my bad. Anywho, this is the Finch Runtly. It is a tiny little sucker, but I feel like it packs kind of a punch, more than I was thinking it would. In my head, just based on the size of this knife and what I could tell from it, I thought it was going to be super light duty. And because of its size, this definitely isn't a heavy duty knife. But now that I'm feeling how kind of substantial it feels and how solid the construction is, I do feel like this knife could probably deal with more than I gave it credit for on the surface. So let's go through a little bit of what I love about this knife so far. Obviously, I just opened this knife up literally like a few minutes ago. So this knife is brand new to me. I haven't used this knife yet. So there's going to be a full review later after I've been able to put this knife to use a little bit. But I figured it was worth giving you my first impressions because they are so strong on this. So first things first, this G10 is really cool. I'm assuming all of their G10 is finished like this, not just the yellow belly version like this one, but because it is yellow, you can kind of see the grain in there and like the layers to the G10 in a way that I don't think you'd pick up on the black. I also just think it looks really cool that this color is so vibrant. It's a really like just a cool yellow. Just like as when you think yellow, I feel like this is the image that comes in your head. It's not mustardy, it's not a Dwight Schrute shirt. It's a real true like sunshine yellow, and it's pretty rad. The scales are actually contoured a little bit as well, as you can see. There's a little bit of that radius there, and it makes them super comfortable. The edges are also really well chamfered. There's no sharp corners on this knife anywhere, and that goes beyond the scales. We'll talk about that on the blade and the clip and all that as well, but yeah, it's just a really, like, it feels soft in the hand without feeling slippery, which is another cool thing about the texture on this G10 now that I think about it. It's not gritty. It doesn't even provide like that much traction, but it's also just not polished super smooth. Like there's enough, it almost feels like a canvas micarta that's well oiled. It's got some feel to it. It's not just slick, but it's also not catchy or grabby at all. And with how small this knife is, and with it being, in my opinion, kind of a fifth pocket, like secondary carry knife, I don't need this to be like super traction-y for like tactical defensive use or anything like that. So I really like the finishing on this G10. I think they did a great job with it. Also, you'll notice right off the bat, the second you get this knife in hand, it does have the Finch kind of insignia there. And I think that's a really cool touch. I'm not a traditional knife guy. I don't own any slip joints. Any backlocks I have are just because I've had them since I was a kid, and they were either given to me or they were cheap or whatever it was. But I don't typically gravitate towards traditional knives. You'll probably see in the next couple of months, as my channel develops, I may give myself some kind of traditional knife challenges to carry one for a little while, like I'm doing with the Sebenza right now, to see if I end up liking it after having it in pocket for a little while. But I love to fidget with my knives, and so I don't generally enjoy slip joints or backlocks or anything like that, and traditionals are essentially always that way. So the fact that this has kind of a traditional motif to it, and it has these traditional lines and features, while being a flipper on bearings, with modern materials and a 3D milled clip, I think it's a really cool kind of segue for me to have something that fits that style and yeah, that motif a little bit without having to jump in and get a slip joint with a bone handle or anything like that. This is cool for me. So that's the handles. The insignia is great. The hardware on this knife is also really nice. I don't know whether this is titanium or stainless hardware, but I love that there's not even there's no tool spot. I don't know what to say about that. You've got the actual place to put your Torx in over here, and this one is just kind of a show piece of hardware because it's on the show scale. So I think the show side of this knife with this hardware looks fantastic. You've got one piece of hardware that you can put a bit into. The pivot is just really pretty looking. It's got this bezel around it that I assume is titanium or steel. It's coated black. It looks awesome to me to give just that little black ring around the hardware. I think it does wonders for the knife. And then on the back side, you've of course got the spot to actually adjust the pivot, and you've got one more bolt there, and then you've got two little pieces of hardware for the clip. And then the clip itself is this milled piece of titanium, which I think looks gorgeous, and it's so simple and just kind of, for this knife, I'm really glad they made that choice, because if they had done a more complex clip or a bent over clip or something like that, I feel like it might detract from the look of this knife, and this knife is just really well thought out. So yeah, G10's fantastic. The hardware I really like. It's got this G10 backspacer, which matches the exact same material as the handle scales themselves. It does feel like it's got a little bit of texture to it. It's almost like rippled there. I don't know if the camera's going to pick that up. It's not jimping, but it's not totally smooth either. It feels really cool. I like that a lot. If you look at it from the inside, it's pretty straightforward. Just a G10 backspacer there. These liners are not milled, but I mean, this knife is tiny, so yeah, I don't think that would have necessarily saved that much weight anyways. This knife, for its size, I wouldn't call lightweight. It does feel pretty robust for its size, but this sucker's tiny. It doesn't weigh that much, and going into my fifth pocket, it's not like I'm going to notice this thing in there. But yeah, so I guess that is the handles and the clip without jumping too deep into this. Obviously, this is first impressions. This isn't a total review. But yeah, let's move to the blade. Now, there's a couple of deployment options, which is fantastic. You'll notice there's a nail nick on both sides of this knife. So that would lend you to assume that the typical way would be to use those nail nicks and open this up that way, which works, totally works. But like I said, I'm not really a traditionalist kind of guy. I like to fidget with my knives. So what's really cool is you've got this, you've got this jimped flipper tab here. It's jimped on both sides, which is pretty cool. Flips like a dream. This detent is just money. I was not expecting the detent to be that crisp. I'm really impressed with it. Now, because we've got jimping there, kind of gives you a nice tractiony spot to keep you from rolling forward on the blade if you're pushing into something. And then you've also got jimping here. So if you wanted to choke up, this spot's actually really convenient to put my pointer finger, and then I can get a full 4 fingers on this knife, which is rad to me. I was not expecting to have that spot to put my finger. Even when I first put this knife in hand, I thought, oh, my pinky's always going to dangle off. But with this spot to choke up, and it's comfortable to do so, it just works perfectly. Anywho, I've gotten off of the subject of deployment, but there's one more method of deployment which has me so excited about this knife. Because there's a nail nick on this side as well, I love to middle finger flip my knives open. I'm used to that from carrying so many Spydercos and having knives with holes for deployment that I really enjoy that. And to me, when I'm fidgeting with a knife, that's one of my favorite ways to fling a knife open. So the fact that it's got that nail nick there that I can get my middle finger into, oh, it's almost, I think this might even be a more reliable way to deploy the knife than the flipper for me, at least because that's what I'm used to. It's just so crisp every single time. If I try to get this knife to fail on deployment, let me see. I can do it, but I have to really focus on just babying that flipper right at the point of detent. But I mean, you have to be focused to do that. Obviously, this knife doesn't have all that much blade mass just because it's so short and stubby, but it's just Oh, it's dialed in so good. It's not totally drop shutty. I bet if this blade was twice as long, it totally would, because it would have the mass to really drop on itself. But it is smooth. These bearings work great. So yeah, last thing on the blade, now that we've kind of gone over deployment, I dig this blade in so many ways. First, the shape. I think this is a really cool blade shape that's not super typical. This is a unique looking knife for the blade shape, and I love that they went ahead and they did this really cool Wharncliffe that's got an abrupt angle here. It's not like my Yojimbo where it's really like slanted out far and gives you a crazy tip. But even though they gave it that abrupt, almost like chisel, reverse tanto angle there, this tip is super sharp. And I am certain, as I'm going into material with that tip, I'm not going to have any issues like penetrating through any kind of media to go ahead and start a cut. So I really like the tip on that. I like that it's not an overly thin tip. You'll see that's still a relatively robust tip because we're working with a pretty thick blade stock, slightly thicker than I was really expecting. But we've got a great flat grind. It's not crazy thin behind the edge, but it doesn't feel thick behind the edge to me either. And I think this thing's just going to kind of be a workhorse, which is interesting because I was expecting it to be so much lighter in terms of its like build purpose. But yeah, we've got this awesome engraving here of Finch on this side. On this side, we have the name of the knife, the Runtly, and then N690, which is the blade steel we're working with. And then lastly, the finishing on this is really, really cool. I'd noticed in the pictures that they had satin flats and stonewashed grinds, and I like that contrast. I'm not big usually on knives that have like partially coated blades. I don't usually like it when it's like black DLC coating with satin flats. I feel like that's too much contrast, but this really works for me. Having the stone washed, and it's not like an acid stone wash, it's like a stone wash over the satin, and then just these nice satin flats. Yeah, it works for me. I think it looks great. And I'm super impressed with this knife. I'm really excited to start using it and just kind of seeing what it's made of. It exceeded my expectations now that I have it in hand, and I'm really, really pumped to, yeah, to start beating on it and see what it can do. So that is the Finch Runtly. I think those are just about all of my first thoughts. I apologize if I forgot anything, but I'm just kind of rambling here. So there you have it. The Finch Runtly is a really cool knife. If you're thinking about getting the yellow, do it, because the yellow is rad in person. But there you have it. That's the Finch Runtly. Thanks again to Rivers Edge Cutlery. Stoked that I was able to make this knife happen. So there you go.